Welcome to Connections, a podcast from the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. Our goal is to have discussions and messages that encourage us and strengthen our faith. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for joining us for Connections. We want to have some spiritual conversations that are encouraging to you, and so we're grateful you're a part of this. I'm excited that we have Barry Throneberry with us as our guest. Full disclosure, we are putting him to work after already putting him to work all day at our Future Ministry Camp. That's going on right now as we record this. And so he's done an awesome job for us there. And we wanted to sit down and have a conversation with him and hopefully share some things that can be encouraging, but also, especially as we think about the challenges in parenting and in faith and family, maybe can provide some guidance and some insights into how those things work. And so I guess I'll start off and just ask Barry to kind of introduce himself. He's just finished his 10th year with the Main Street congregation in Springfield. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
Yeah, was blessed to grow up in Shelbyville, Tennessee, or Shebville, if you're from there, not too far away in Bedford County. School at Freed Hardeman, and then was blessed after Freed to actually end up back here in Columbia, where I was a youth minister and education minister at the Highland Church of Christ for just over 12 years. And then I had always knew that I wanted to preach, and was blessed to find Main Street in Springfield. And so I've been in full-time work for just over 22 years, and blessed only be in two spots. And I don't know what the Lord has in store, but I do love being at Main Street in Springfield. So I hope I'm there a good long time still. But my wife and I have two daughters, they're with me. My mom and dad, I'm an only child, so they moved up to Springfield, and that has turned out to be a beautiful thing. But a lot of good work there, but I've been blessed to be a part of I was trying to think about the preacher camp that's here. And I don't know if it has been 20 years, but it's been 17, 18, 19-ish that I've come and helped. If I haven't been on staff, I've come in and spoke and done various things just because I was close and worked with young people, but then also have been on staff for a length of time. And something I always look forward to is being here and especially teaching the Bible to young men and especially wannabe preachers. I didn't grow up with that. I didn't grow up with anybody I didn't go to a preacher training school or a camp. I just was kind of a guy that was blessed to have some ministers kind of nurture me and point me in the direction of ministry and of preaching, which I took to younger. And so I've always thought, well, I never got that opportunity, but if any young man ever wanted to, then I'd want to give back to it. So blessed with this camp.
Absolutely.
And Horizons at Freed is a big deal to me. But the main reasons is just especially working with especially young people who want to teach and preach the Bible is a big deal to me.
Awesome. Well, we've benefited a lot from you being a part of this camp, and we've got, I think, 21 guys that are a part this year, and so grateful for that opportunity. And I've had the chance to be friends with Barry since we were in school together, and one of the things that happens when you have those long-term friendships is you get to see friends of yours experience life changes, just like they get to see you experience those life changes. And so I've asked Barry to share a little bit about what you have learned and what your experience has been. And those who knew Barry when he lived here and knew his family would be familiar with Harper's story. But he mentioned having two daughters, and I'd just like you to tell a little bit about the story of your older daughter and some of the things you all learned throughout that process early on and kind of where you are now.
Yeah. Well, when I'd been here for a few years, my wife and I kind of had a plan for a larger family. I'm an only child, so whether I had one or a dozen, I don't know what that's like, two or more. My wife comes from a bigger family. Where there were 5 of them. And so we kind of had that idea, and I shrugged my shoulders and love kids. And we're like, well, let's see what the Lord has in store. But our oldest, when she was born, we recognized that there was just a couple of things that were just not necessarily normal. When it came to her size, we kind of learned some other elements. We found out, and actually was born here in Murray County at the hospital, and they were wonderful. She spent about 8 days in the NICU, and we kind of noticed by the end that there was kind of a unique doctor who was showing nurses a lot about our kid. And I didn't realize what that was. And I never really knew what it was until we came to find out when my daughter was about 3 weeks old through some prenatal some newborn screenings.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got reference to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital that my daughter has cystic fibrosis. Knowing a couple of doctors the way that I do, there's a strong likelihood when that first newborn screening came back elevated, because they screened twice, and I'll try to keep this concise, more than likely the doctor saw the other signs and knew that there was a very strong likelihood, not confirmed, that my daughter had CF and was probably showing the nurses, hey, these are things to look for if this is a possibility, which turned out true. But we go to Vanderbilt, and my daughter is 12 years old with cystic fibrosis. And that was just an absolute upheaval of a world. My wife comes, my father-in-law was a medical doctor, and he had no idea it takes two parents, both with the genetic carriers. And without getting into the science of it, more backstory, I'm adopted. So my joke is I'm the genetic monopoly anyways. I don't know much about anything about my background, but my father-in-law, who is a doctor, had no idea, tracing family medical history, that was even a reality. But here we are with a daughter with CF, and actually our second daughter we decided to have a few years later after a lot of consideration. She doesn't. There's a 1 in 4 chance. If you or both, it takes both parents. Fun fact, if my daughter gets married, Lord willing, one day, and if she wants to start a family, if her husband isn't a carrier, none of my grandkids will have it. But the odds increase to, there's a 50% chance likelihood. If she marries a genetic carrier, which by the way, 1 in 7 white Americans is a genetic carrier, for this gene. But it takes 2 of them obviously together, and then it's 1 on 4. So there you can do your percentages of how that works as a genetic disorder. But anyways, but if she marries somebody and he's not a carrier, none of my grandkids, Lord willing, maybe if, will have it.
Right.
But then if they are a carrier, the likelihood of them having it will be increased than the 1 in 4. But it basically just resulted in, I could talk about some faith and medicine or how they overlap. I'll give you a couple of illustrations. When she was first born, of course, being the young couple that we were, younger, I mean, not too young, but we had saved up our money trying to figure out, okay, how would we pay for hospital expenses? Being a minister, my wife being an educator, school teacher, how would we pay? And we looked at all the insurance and numbers, but we didn't expect what happens if a kid has an issue.
Yeah.
And we kind of guesstimated, and because she came a few weeks early, but it turned out we had some pretty extensive medical bills. Well, right when some of that comes due, all the medicines that we had to begin doing with our daughter aren't exactly over-the-counter medicines, because it's of what it is. And so I go to Walgreens and I write a prescription, because our insurance was our own insurance and it wasn't that great. So I wrote a check for, I can't remember how many hundreds of dollars. Yeah. And I went, this is going to be every month, hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
With, if I'm being just honest, a youth minister's salary and an educator's salary, and then the hospital bills come due. And, it was amazing that Highland, where I was here in Columbia, and actually some members from a lot of folks in this community who knew us, I'd been here for a few years as a minister, helped us with that initial, cost. And that was the first thing that was like, okay, but then it was ahead. And we were blessed to have some stars align. We were able to get some state assistance with healthcare, but it just so happened that our social worker was the wife of a minister of another religious group, but she knew how to, I don't want to say cook the books. That's not what happened. Yeah. I don't want to get it. And this was years ago, so I don't know if there's anybody to get in trouble, but she knew how to look at our finances, and we barely made it by just a few $100s qualifying for some assistance. And so the first year of her life, that was the biggest blessing. So we were able to kind of recharge, because if I'm being honest, all the medical stuff emptied us out.
Sure.
We're dealing with everything as we learn this. But then the folks at Highland were phenomenal. They set up a little medical fund where that people could donate to, and we still have it. And that was a blessing because along the way and where I'm at now, Main Street, I'm blessed because folks can still give to that.
Yeah.
But that has been a godsend. Of course, getting insurance along the way has been massive. But our daily routine with cystic fibrosis is, my daughter does about an hour and a half of respiratory therapy with a therapy vest and breathing treatments. She takes pills for every meal because the genetic disorder affects the pancreas and the lungs, go figure. And then, so it's digestive and respiratory is what it affects. But she does that every day. It's all she's ever known. We've opened up pills. My wife's opened up most of the pills and we've poured the contents of those pills in her mouth so she could get her nutrients. She takes specialized vitamins. My daughter can't absorb fat, which is ironic. The pancreas secretes an enzyme and so that's the nutrition side, but then it's a lung disorder as well. Most people think of it as a lung disorder and not necessarily a dietary, but it's actually both and. And anyways, so we take a pretty regimented breathing treatments and then pills. And along the way, it's just amazing. First of all, it was our first one. It's all we ever knew. And then we had a second one without, and we were, no offense, kind of like, oh, this is easy dealing with not the first one. I'm not knocking anybody who's had, kids and it's tough. There's whole nother issues of parenting. But when she was a baby, our Lily Jo, our 6-year-old, Harper's 12 and Lily's 6. But we had that hilarious moment of like, oh, this kid's 10 times easier than all this other aspect. But, we've been regulars at Vandy Children's Hospital. That was part of the reason why I was blessed to be at Springfield is I put a dot on Vandy's Children's Hospital and I just prayed, God, I hope I can get to Vandy's Children's Hospital, and that's where I was blessed. Kind of right on the edge of my little circle was Springfield, but close enough, just like we were blessed here in Columbia. And I know there are great places all over, but I hope the good Lord keeps us there because they know us. We know them. They've done such an amazing job. But God's people on two fronts. First of all, God's people have been phenomenal to us. I've been blessed to work with elders who they thought my daughter would be a lot more sick than what she is. One of the members at Main Street years ago, sorry about that. One of the members at Main Street years ago actually had cystic and died from cystic. And so when they hired me, people in time frames just kind of thought it would be that way. But I guess they still wanted me and my family enough and loved Harper. But all that's changed with all the medicines. And how they've developed. And I could talk a little bit about those. I don't want to bore anybody. I can talk about any of this stuff for days, but the overlap, is just the elders being like, we thought she would be a lot more sick and she's actually not. And when you saw her, you'd never know anything's wrong with her. It's not, anything mental and it's not anything physical, at all. It's just, for lack of a better term, genetic internal.
Yeah.
But we've just been blessed because again, the way we see it on one front is God's people have been good to us. God takes care. I'd like to think I try to love where I'm at. And of course we give to God as God commands, but God has blessed us with the care of our daughter and still does, second of all, just a phenomenal place in Vanderbilt. I won't mention our doctor's name. I don't know if he's a religious man. 12 years. He held my daughter when she was 3 weeks old, and he is still technically her respiratory doctor, her pulmonologist today. And I can't peg him. He won't. He knows I'm a minister, and he won't give me any insight as to where he lands, so to speak. But he throws little things along the way that just reminds me of God and His goodness. And I see a lot of what's happened, even in her lifetime medically, as answered prayers. I would pray for healing and for instant healing for one day to where she didn't have to do any of that therapy or didn't have to remember to take those pills. But then again, we're in an incredible place that takes care of us. Yeah. More medicines have come out that are actually miraculous is an overused word, but are pretty phenomenal, especially with the cystic fibrosis community and what they're able to do. But what I see is, first of all, God's people being good. And for any family that feels guilty asking, I realize that. But it might not hurt to ask how God's people want to bless, and God's people really do want to bless. But how I see God's providence maybe in a little bit different way than some. Because, look, I don't know who invents some medicines. I don't know some companies that may profit mightily off some medicines. And I can't endorse all medicines.
Right.
But I can speak for what my daughter does. And I can smile and nod knowing that, to me, those medicines that she takes and the quality of her health, and by the way, her health is phenomenal. Her lung function is beyond what anything they would want a cystic kid to have, much less a kid without cystic. And everything about her life with these medicines has just changed. To me, that's how God answers prayers too. We think the big automatic yes, no, heal. But as we've progressed along, that's how I've seen the hand of God in a lot of ways just in our life. And so there's a lot of days, if I can be honest, that I just kind of do one of these numbers.
Right.
Or if you've seen one of my favorites, maybe I'm being an analogy here, the movie Madagascar with the penguins, smile and wave, boys.
That's right.
Smile and wave. There's an element some days where I just say my little thanks to God.
Yeah.
And look at what all he's blessed us with and carried us. But if you had to ask, my daughter's birthday's coming up in August. She'll be 13. So pray for us for a whole nother host of issues.
The teenage years have arrived.
Cystic fibrosis is like number 9 on my list right now of parental worries for her. But if you were to say, her birthday's at the end of August, when she was born, especially leading into September, here's where we would be. I wouldn't have thought that then.
Or even that it would be 9th on the list.
Yes. Because of course the worst happens.
Yeah.
And, or excuse me, the worst, you think of the worst happening.
Right.
And there's a spiritual principle, I think, as well, when the folks at Vanderbilt, this doctor is holding her and says, I bet you've read stuff on the internet. And I was like, yeah. And he went, stop, because that's not real life. And I was like, okay, that might serve me well in ministry, these years later, that not everything you read of one story is everybody's story. And that's been very true, because he said, well, most people are out living life and they don't have time to write about all the bad stuff. And at the end of the day, it's been challenging along the way. And she's had other normal health stuff, that any kid might have, but God has been awful good on multiple fronts. I think, again, like I said, medically with prayers and great people to take care of us, and then God's people being really good. Yeah. And me being in a job that if I need to be the one that stays home, I can kind of write a sermon or two and make phone calls from home.
Right.
But I'm thankful that that's pretty rare. And as far as anyone would ever know her, you'd never know until, you see her take a handful of pills before a meal, or she has to take some time in the morning and in the evening to do therapy and respiratory therapy. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. But I can go down any or more rabbit holes you want me to, or expand any more. But that's, I'm kind of a walking smile of both a little bit of providence and then a whole lot of goodness that I've seen in my own life.
Well, and just thinking about, you've already touched on some of the spiritual lessons you've learned. Even I'm sure there's some parenting principles that show up in different ways when you're in that setting. I can imagine one of the things people would probably need to hear, and this could be true for a lot of different situations, is even the description about mealtime is, there are some parents that for various reasons going out to eat after church, there's got to be some forethought. There's got to be some supplies. There's got to be some things, and we don't always consider that for others. Are there any things you've seen from that, and maybe talking to people kind of in the community that have dealt with, in that CF community? Like, what are some things that stand out kind of in those experiences?
Well, one of the biggest things is obviously when she was younger, a lot of people, when it came, especially as a minister, you'd want a fellowship and, you'd want to go to the Mexican restaurant after church or the ice cream. And that's great in the summer. But for years, and now that she's getting a little older, but for years, if we went somewhere, she had to have pills, and somebody to recognize that, or me to have them. And it's not the end of the world if she skips them, but she doesn't really want to skip them very much for various other health reasons. But it was kind of tough at first because we still had an hour and a half of therapy at night. And so I think of a Wednesday night, and getting home. And for a lot of families, it's we can spend a little bit of time here because we can get home, change clothes, brush some teeth, and get in bed. Well, our brains operate on, she needs 45 minutes in the morning before school, which isn't fun, by the way, where she goes to school at 7:20.
Yeah.
So my daughter gets up at 5:15 in the morning, and it's not for sports. It's just to do her therapy and then get ready as now a preteen and a teenage girl is wont to do very differently than when she was younger than that. And so we're factoring and learning all of that right now. But that was one of the hardest things for us wasn't necessarily the pills, even though we loved the funny looks. Whenever my 3-year-old, she learned to take pills whole at 18 months old, which a lot of adults don't take one.
Yeah.
And she joked one time, said, "Dad, my record's 11." And I was like, that's pretty impressive, but don't ever do that.
Right.
Let's not do that again for choking hazard. But
she's
like, I took 11 at once. I was like, that's cool, but not cool. Like, oh, okay, that's awesome, kid. But besides like people seeing her just take handfuls of pills at a time, which she has to do, is just that factor, is that sometimes it can be tough because it's not just, hey, let's go grab some ice cream and sit and then get home and get in bed. We had to factor in, okay, this is going to take an hour to an hour and 15 minutes at night to do a breathing treatment. Wait a minute, a breathing treatment, 30 minutes of a respiratory vest, and then another 15-minute breathing treatment after that. That's been our nightly routine for years now, is to give you a time frame. And so my kid, even to this day, doesn't just get to come home and fall into bed.
Right.
We have to, again, it's not the end of the world, but we're not in the business of skipping.
Yeah.
Because again, to think about it, especially for younger families, we were taught, and this seems to be true with her health, it's like an investment. What's scary are the parents who skip at the beginning. Usually they pay for it in greater detail when those kids get older with the issues.
Yeah.
We at least heeded that advice of be diligent when they're young. And that is what will maximize greater health when they get older. And there's other factors there. But that was one of our biggest things, was every once in a while, it was, no, we can't. Or sometimes that has impacted a little bit about our practice of hospitality at night.
Sure. And
not something I've tried to make up for in other ways as a minister, and even as a minister's family as well. With my availability in other areas, but that, that's been something. But the older she's got, the less that has occurred. But she has to learn to manage that. And so now we're kind of in that unique situation, but that's something to remember that, it wasn't easy for us from where we went to, sure, let's, hang out for an hour and a half on a Sunday night, or, hey, let's go get ice cream or whatever, as a group of people on Wednesday, that it kind of quickly, especially during the school year for us, just wasn't a reality. And then especially where my two girls go to school, they start early, they start at 7:45 and 7:15. And so, she's got to be at school at 7 with all that in the morning. And it that affects bedtime. Sleep, rest is of course key as well. So it's one of those things that again, some people at first were, hey, and luckily if we would explain it to them, they're like, oh, they got it. Even if maybe they didn't get it, like, well, hey, what's the big deal? But at the same time, I guess we've been there long enough and people know Harper enough that it's not as big a deal. And for us, we try to maximize in the summertime. So during the summer, on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights after church, hey, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's do. And Harper has no problem with that, staying up later anyways.
Sure. Right.
Or sleeping in the morning. But when we were little, that was tough sometimes because it was like, well, I'll go. And then it kind of was awkward because they're like, well, we kind of wanted, the family,
right.
like families. And I'm like, well, okay, then.
Yeah.
I'll go home and with my family. Let's schedule this, but then as the church got to know us, it turned out to be a great thing. So now we're blessed. She goes to camp, and all of her friends who she's known now for almost 10 years at Main Street, they're just as diligent about making her do her therapy as she is. Like, she's the one who'll cut corners. And now what we love is she has friends that are like, nope. And we're like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's as parents, because again, like Harper, I love being at camp, and all of a sudden you'll hear, Harper, did you take your pills? And I'm like, that's hilarious that her friends are like, make that a reality.
Become part of life.
It is. Part of, and what for us, we thought would be, something super self-conscious. And no doubt it is at times, for Harper, and it is for us too.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest. There's a lot of times where we just kind of smile, like I said, smile and wave and see how neat it is, and for the folks that don't understand, maybe they just don't understand. And we kind of had to learn too, hey, that's fine,
right.
That's fine. And that's tough for me, tough for my wife, tough for Harper. We're kind of the people pleaser types, but at the end of the day, it's what's needed. But sometimes, you might need to just realize that, as especially younger, and by the way, give that grace to the younger families.
Yeah.
That's something we were blessed with at Highland. Harper couldn't go to church the first 9 months of her life because it was during cold and flu season. And so RSV, as it is a big deal, is very scary with a newborn. And she was born premature. So you kind of had a compound effect of how dangerous RSV was. So she was born at the end of August. Our first Sunday was not, as a family at Highland, was not until Easter the next year.
Wow.
And so my wife stayed at home with our daughter, and we just went to doctor's visits and some family gatherings, but we had to be careful. And that was I was blessed to be at Highland enough, and I was able to explain to Highland, here's our situation, that most people respected that. But it was a big Sunday when Harper finally rolled in on, especially Easter Sunday.
Right.
But it kind of mattered who held her and why.
Sure.
But I was blessed to be at a phenomenal church. So when she was in the nursery, they had a special bag of toys just so there wouldn't be germs, for her. So she had Harper's bag, which wasn't that big a deal. We were like, well, you don't have to. They're like, no. And we're like, okay.
That's good.
But people kind of knew, give a little bit of a wide berth if you got a runny nose. And, again, it wasn't like deathly type stuff, but it could have been dangerous.
Yeah.
And, but that was a tough time for my wife. And, cause she was at home. And so every Sunday, every Wednesday, I went to church because I was the minister.
Right.
And I was blessed one Sunday night a month. That's when my wife went to church, and I got that night to stay at home. But most of the time, being a youth minister, we had activities and devos. So that was kind of tough for her because she would be better to talk about that. I was just the husband trying to work and be the minister, but I probably should have recognized a little bit more some of my wife's needs there. But she was blessed with some good ladies that were able to take care of her and take her out to get her away, because those walls got a little tight with that newborn having to stay home. And that's not a knock on anything here. But it was just one of those kind of learning that and seeing that and maybe giving a little grace, or being the one to invite if the husband or wife wants to stay home, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
With the little one, of getting them out. And I was blessed to have some of that just by way of ministry, but sometimes it could have been a little tougher on my wife. But, when we did get out, we were out. And then when we needed to stay in those first couple of years, especially during cold and flu season, that was just the reality. But we were vocal on that, of like, hey, these are our needs.
Yeah.
And maybe you get it, maybe you don't, but it's our reality. And so we kept on trucking, so to speak, with that.
Well, one of the things I love is I'm thinking about the story and just knowing knowing you kind of throughout that process, obviously a little more closely connected when you guys were in Columbia, but then through Future Ministry Camp, getting to stay connected. There's a thing that I read about years ago, and I'm convinced that it applies to a lot of areas in life. But it was this research that was done into what they call identity ambiguity theory, and it started when you had people that were missing in action in war, and family was trying to figure out, how do we grieve? We're not sure what's happening. And as you mentioned, I think any kind of diagnosis, and now they apply this to, they talk about it, kind of the ambiguous loss, where you're not 100% sure what's changed exactly. Like, you don't know what your new identity is going to be, but you know it's going to be different, and so to hear the story of the early part of you guys facing that, which again could apply to a lot of different people in a lot of different settings, and now to be on the other end of that, in a sense, where you say, hey, we saw where this led us. Here's how we had to develop. Here's what we had to learn, and here's how we had to grow. And I think it would be really encouraging, hopefully for anybody listening to this, that's on the front end of that kind of process. And it doesn't have to just be with CF or just anything physical, but
sure,
on the front end of that, where you're like, I knew what I expected life to look like. Now something has happened and life's going to look different. And I'm not 100% sure what that is. I might not even be 50% sure. And so just to see that there does come a time where you can look back and say, okay, here's how God helped us. Here's who did this. And here's where we're looking at now.
Yeah.
I think is powerful. And I do believe that concept of ambiguous loss is kind of a helpful one anytime we're going through change or transition.
Yeah.
To be like, okay, it's okay for me not to know exactly what life's going to look like, because I can't know. There'll be a time when I can look back and know, but it's not right now, and so just to hear how you all have journeyed through that, I think is really helpful.
I think, a couple of the great blessings for me is, embracing life. One of my wife's favorite saying is, life, you've heard the phrase, life ain't fair, or life's not fair. And my wife, being the educator and very much a realist, said, well, fair's where you get cotton candy and ride rides. That's not life.
Yeah.
And that's not to embrace the awfulness of it, but it's like, you can struggle with that. Why us? You can struggle with that with, why my kid? You can struggle with that. But on the flip side of that, a lot of families who go through things will tell you, I wouldn't have seen this, and this. And if you want to make a spiritual application, I guess that's what we do as ministers. It's easy for us to think of a lot of Bible stories because we get the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, Daniel is a great example of a young man on the front end, right, who says, I'm not going to eat this food. And on the back end is staring at a lion all night, not eating him. Pretty fascinating, maybe dichotomy there that you see in just 6 chapters of Daniel. But I'm assuming Daniel the teenager and Daniel the older man, obviously they're the same Daniel. You see characteristics, but you see an interesting life progression there that sometimes we have to take that deep breath on and realize we're on that journey.
Yeah.
And I was blessed to get that along the way. One was from a doctor, like I mentioned, that I can't get a read on spiritually at Vanderbilt, who would drop little truths along the way of, we've got, if I can say real quick, one of the great lines he said about why we had a second kid. We were terrified to have a second kid, 1 out of 4.
Mm-hmm.
And besides the personal weight of, man, this kid's kind of, this kid has cystic because of, it's a genetic thing that I didn't, there's a weight there. That may be a whole nother psychological conversation to wrestle with. But there is an element too, where I never will forget this doctor, unprovoked, looked at us and said, Barry, we've got this as a medical team. Like, there's medicines coming out and those medicines have become a reality. There's our treatment of what we've done. There's Harper's health you can see. And then he just looked at, and I never will forget this conversation. He said, and if you have a second kid with CF, you know exactly what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, well, I guess when you think about it like that,
Yeah.
you know, and we were blessed again. We wanted to have more children, but we have our lovely two, and the second one didn't, which was a beautiful moment. But I never will forget, he said that, and he was just like, well, Barry, you know, we've got this as a disease with the medicine. And then he looked at me again. I can't get a read on this guy, God moment.
Mm-hmm.
He looked and he said, but none of us really know what holds tomorrow, do we? And I was like, easy, buddy. That's my territory, not yours. You know what I mean? Like, I'm the one that preaches that, not you. But I left that Vanderbilt appointment and I just smiled at God and was like, man, you do that too. You know, you can use that too. And sometimes if I'd like to think I'm blessed with some faith, but you don't really know the faith you have. Right. And that's what I see with her. And I don't know what the next 7 years could be. I don't know if it could be something else health-wise, which is none of us know. We just say our prayers. And in her case, literally, hopefully all of us, we take our vitamins. You know what I mean? And we make good decisions on a lot of fronts. And here we go. Yeah. But that's the great thing along the way is what happens. And from, again, the same doctor holding the 3-week-old, trying to talk us off a ledge of absolute terror, to that same doctor looking at us with a 6-year-old saying, hey, if you want to have more kids, to now the same doctor, now that she's rolling into being a teenager, just like, y'all good? You know, when we take off our tests and we go every 3 months and they're fast. You need to see this doctor. We have a whole team. Won't get into details. How's nutrition? How's lungs? How's her medicine, her blood work with the medicine she takes, checking height, checking weight, checking school 4 times a year. Boom, 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 boom. Takes a little while to see. We're out the door and we see all the physicians in the clinic for various reasons of how they like to do it. But he pops his head in every time. Y'all good? All right, good. Man, she's getting big. I'm like, yeah. Well, we'll see you in 3 months.
That's awesome.
And then rock and roll. And again, same guy who spent 4 hours with us, 3 hours with us.
Yeah.
You know, I never will forget that first visit at Vanderbilt, holding my 3-week-old, trying to talk us down. And here we are, you know, next month we'll go to Vandy for another checkup, and we're just, you know, but my 12-year-old sticks her arm out and gives blood like it's no problem. It takes pills like it's no problem. And her friends look at her like, nope, people don't normally do that at our age. And she's like, huh, kind of all I've ever known.
Right. Doesn't know any different.
And we just smile and wave. Like, we just keep on trucking and thank the Almighty in the process of his goodness.
Absolutely. Well, man, I appreciate you being willing to share that with us and to share your faith through all that. And also just to be honest with those emotions we experience along the way. There are often not enough good forums for us to share some of those real things that we might not have a chance to. So I appreciate you being willing to share that, and certainly hope this has been encouraging. Appreciate everybody who is joining in on Connections, and encourage you to subscribe and all that good stuff, however you watch this or listen to this. As a reminder, if you're in the Maury County area and you are looking for a place to worship, we would love to have you worship with us at Graymere. If you're listening to this in Springfield, in that area, I know the Main Street congregation, there's a lot of great people there. They'd love to have you worship with them. We just want to find ways that we can encourage you spiritually. We appreciate you being with us on Connections.
Thank you for being part of Connections. We hope it was an encouragement to you. If you live in the Columbia area and don't have a church home, we would love for you to worship with us. You can find out information about meeting times, classes, and what to expect at graymere.com. You will always receive a warm welcome from the Graymere Church of Christ.